Just 2 years ago, this thriving coral reef looked like this.
But after thousands of hours of work from the dedicated team at Project Lout, the reef has been restored, and so many sea creatures have come back. In this video, I'm on a mission to document this transformation through diving, 3D mapping, and facial recognition software. But most importantly, by deploying spy cameras across the patch to see what's swimming around when nobody is watching.
Easy. Easy.
Yep, that's me putting a camera on the nest of the most dangerous fish in the ocean. But first, how do you even go about restoring a reef? Well, here's how the team at Project Lout do it. Step 1. Paint the steel coral stars with concrete and leave them in the open ocean for a couple of weeks until they get covered in this purple crust. This is coralline algae, the glue that helps corals fuse to the structures. Step 2. A small army of divers then work tirelessly to collect coral fragments from the reef.
So, one really important thing to mention is that the team behind this project don't break off any healthy and live coral from the reef. Instead, because there are really strong currents here, loads of boat activity and loads of tourism activity, there's already a massive abundance of natural frags on the ocean floor.
The team makes sure to collect a wide variety of different coral genera that all serve a different purpose on the reef, like the reef-building Acropora.
So, contrary to popular belief, corals like this Acropora here are actually animals. Now, this isn't a load of different animals, but a colony of different polyps that are all genetically identical. And these polyps reside in these tubular skeletal structures called corallites.
The corallites and polyps grow and divide to form completely different shapes and patterns on different species of coral. Some, like this Echinopora, grow as thin plates, whilst other species like Goniopora and Euphyllia have much larger corallites that house giant polyps with long streaming tentacles. In fact, the shape, structure and organisation of the corallites is how you identify different species. But to do so, you've got to have very good eyesight. Once collected, the frags are carried to the surface in baskets, but not before a few opportunistic fish make the most of an easy meal.
Oh, hello Mr. Moorish Idol. Sorry, I just need my camera back.
Like all butterfly fish species, these idols are corallivores, meaning they eat coral. It might seem destructive, but corallivores actually help keep reefs healthy by preventing any one species from dominating, encouraging diversity and creating new space for corals to grow. Evidence of the presence of coral-eating species is widespread across the reef. These little white lines are likely the teeth marks of a school of coral-munching black-lipped butterfly fish. I'm not entirely sure why these corallivores like eating coral so much though, because it's pretty gross.
So slimy.
But corals slime for good reason.
You can think of it as an injury to the coral itself. It secretes a mucus, and the mucus will actually help. It basically coats and then seals the injury from bacteria.
The white skeleton you can see inside these corals is calcium carbonate. Corals metabolize calcium and carbonate ions from the water, combining them to form calcium carbonate, which is deposited as a rigid skeleton that helps the coral grow. Whilst most skeletons are white, this unusual Heliopora has gone for something a little more vibrant. Once on the boat, the larger frags are broken up into smaller sections to make them easier to fix to the structures, without compromising their chances of survival.
Important for restoration is that we tailor the fragment size to the expected maintenance. These are more robust.
Yep, plastic sucks, but research shows that zip ties are still the most effective method of attaching frags at scale. And this method is used by coral projects all over the world. Whilst biodegradable alternatives do exist, they are not practical or cost-effective. Yet. The structures are then carried back down to the reef, but the work does not stop here. In the very beginning, these coral structures are almost like small nurseries, and with few fish attracted to them, the Project Lout team must do essential maintenance work to remove algae and ensure their survival. And if done right, the corals on these freshly planted structures quickly fuse in place and start to grow. Although, when I say quickly, corals don't do anything in a rush.
So, this is what a fresh spider looks like after about 1 month's growth. This is 3 months' growth. this is 6 months' growth, this is about a year's growth, and finally, after 2 years, the structures look like this. And the coral cover on this patch is now so dense that you almost can't even see the spiders anymore. So I helped out with this coral planting project about a year ago, and I remember finding this coral just here. But since then, the team have planted many hundreds more spiders, and now the patch looks like this.
This expansive patch that was once rubble is now well on its way to making a full recovery. Modern advancements in 3D mapping technology mean the Project Lout team has also been able to visually capture this transformation across the entire restoration site. But so what? Why is restoring the reef so important? Well, when you restore the foundations of any ecosystem, you also bring back a huge variety of life that hunts on it, hides in it, and feeds on it.
Oh, that is not good. So, healthy coral reefs provide a whole host of different benefits for the ocean. But one of the main benefits is the increased habitat availability for loads of different marine species.
However, whilst some critters are happy to have their photos taken, in order to truly appreciate the variety of life that's returned to this reef, we need to be a little more sneaky.
We need to set up some spy cameras.
We drop these spy cameras across the entire site, some beneath the coral structures, some alongside, and some right on top. And yes, I also risked my life placing one next to the nest of the most aggressive fish on the reef. But more on that later. As soon as the sun hits the surface each morning, the reef immediately wakes up. Surgeonfishes, butterflyfish, damsels and wrasses emerge from their hiding spots after surviving yet another night, gradually regrouping into schools. There's fin flaring, posturing, subtle ways of re-establishing hierarchy. More solitary reef dwellers move slowly at first, pausing to investigate anything new that's appeared overnight. For some, life on the reef is really tiring work. But even at first light, the reef is not safe. Large predators like long-faced emperors patrol at dawn, gliding across the coral with slow, deliberate movements. Despite this individual's size, it too is dwarfed by the much larger Napoleon wrasse. Although omnivorous, these enormous reef residents are probably a little too lethargic to pose much of a threat to most alert fish on the reef. Above the corals, large schools of sergeant majors, damsels and chromis rise up in the water column, snatching at drifting food particles swept through by the current. However, whilst lots of the action plays out on top of the reef, just as much is happening beneath it, inside the connected tunnels and crevices that run underneath the coral spiders. In the more open patches, long barbel goatfish rummage through the rubble and sand, digging furiously with the sensitive barbules on their chins. These little whisker-like feelers help them detect the subtle movements of crustaceans and mollusks buried just beneath the surface. Smaller fish linger nearby, sand perches, wrasses and even other goatfish, keeping a safe distance but watching closely, hopeful that the long barbel goatfish will dig up more than it can chew. Larger fish like this red-breasted wrasse cut in line, seemingly unbothered by the goatfish's aggression. These checkerboard wrasse hone in on any disturbance on top of the sand, and seem completely unbothered by what creature is causing it.
So this is a checkerboard wrasse, and he's hopeful I'm going to dig something up for him to eat.
Underneath the younger coral structures, cover is limited, and as such most fish prefer to hide in the densest sections, safe from aerial attacks. Although some of them are very special.
Oh, look at that! That is one of the most awesome looking fish on the reef.
This is a juvenile yellow boxfish. As adults they don't look quite as fancy, trading their vibrant yellow for more subdued blues and golds. Like all boxfishes, the yellow boxfish produces a potent toxin called ostracytoxin, and its vivid coloration is a warning to predators that it's not worth the risk. This is known as aposomatism, where bright colours serve as nature's way of saying "don't eat me." Boxfishes are omnivores, feeding on algae, sponges, small crustaceans and even worms. When they're smaller, they tend to graze on algae and pick at tiny invertebrates tucked into the reef. This one has made the most of the dense Acropora thickets under the restoration site, feeding in peace, out of reach of larger fish. They share these protected spots with a whole host of fish, including a variety of angelfish species. Dwarf angelfishes, like keyhole, bicolour and pearl scaled, typically live in harems. They are protogonous hermaphrodites, meaning that if the dominant male dies, the largest female changes sex to replace him. In contrast, larger angelfish species, like this semicircle angelfish, are pair-forming and may be monogamous. This individual appears to be transitioning from its juvenile to adult coloration. Other fish families, like the parrotfishes, also drastically change their coloration and pattern as they age. And I don't think it'll be long before this large individual can no longer squeeze through the tight gaps in the coral spiders to feed. However, while many reef fish use these connected tunnels to move around and rest, they still have to remain vigilant, for predators patrol here. This is a tail-spot squirrelfish, an opportunistic predator that feeds on small fish and crustaceans. It mainly hunts under the cover of darkness, spending its days tucked deep within the reef, although it will venture out during the day if an opportunity presents itself. However, other predators with a similar diet don't need darkness to hunt. Relying on stealth and camouflage, trumpetfish hunt above, alongside, and inside the reef, using a sudden suction feeding strike to engulf fish whole. They'll often hunt vertically, hiding among schools of harmless herbivores to remain undetected. But not all of them appear to be masters of disguise. Believe it or not, this bright yellow individual is the same species, and given nature doesn't do anything by mistake, it's interesting to wonder what advantage this bold coloration might offer. Despite the constant threat from many reef predators, other reef fish seem to have much more important things on their mind. This pair of three-spot damselfish are using the protection of the coral spiders to court. The male fish hovers above a potential nesting site, in this case a patch of rubble, to draw in a female. The pair circle near the substrate, rapidly contracting their muscles to produce a purring sound that communicates both dominance and a readiness to spawn. Now, damselfish are known to aggressively guard their eggs, chasing off every potential threat. Unfortunately though, they're not the only fish to do so, and some of them are armed with a much bigger set of teeth. Other creatures don't make as much of a song and dance, however. This red ribbon that hangs from the spiders is actually a cluster of eggs, put here by a Spanish dancer, a large nocturnal nudibranch. However, whilst some fish have other things on their minds, for most, the day is spent endlessly feeding.
So some of the most common fish you find on the reef are algivores and corallivores. Algivores eat algae, corallivores eat corals, and some, like these butterfly fish, eat both.
Butterfly fish are some of the most recognisable reef species, but they're also some of the fussiest eaters. Each species tends to specialise, with long snouts and delicate jaws adapted to nip at specific prey, from coral polyps to feather duster worms. This restoration site is covered in many different species, from common blacklips to threadfin, teardrop and triangular butterfly fish. One of the more distinct species comes armed with an incredibly elongated snout that it uses to reach hidden prey in deep crevices. Whilst these coral-eating fish help keep the reefs healthy, the benefits of other coral-eating critters are a little more contested.
Oh, that is not good.
This is a crown-of-thorns starfish, a venomous coral predator. In some parts of the world, changing ocean conditions have caused unsustainable population growth. However, on this reef, their numbers are healthy, and as such, they should be left to feed in peace. Not all coral predators come armed with needle-sharp spines or rows of teeth, though.
Oh, and I've just spotted something interesting here. This is the purple sponge, and it's one of the main threats to the corals on this reef here. There's a little bit on this acropora just here.
This purple sponge aggressively overgrows live corals, forming a thin encrusting mat that spreads rapidly across the reef. It doesn't eat corals as such, but outcompetes them, blocking light and oxygen and secreting cytotoxic chemicals that stress or kill the corals. Whilst this reef isn't too heavily affected, the Project Laut team are keeping an eye on this silent killer to ensure it remains in check. Now, whilst the reef here is dominated by reef-building acroporas and echinoporas, Other groups of corals also exist.
And as well as the hard corals, we also have these massive fields of soft corals. And these are different to the hard corals in that they don't deposit a calcium carbonate skeleton. They get most of their food from filter feeding organic matter out of the water column, using these little polyp tentacles they've got.
Whilst many critters prefer to hide amongst the hardened walls of the reef-building corals, others, like this cockerel wrasse, have opted for a life amongst the fields of soft corals, using both colour and behavioural mimicry to remain undetected. Other tentacled creatures also feed on organic matter that drifts across the reef.
So, although this here looks like some of the soft corals we've already seen, it is in fact an anemone. And something really interesting about this anemone is that about 6 months ago it didn't look like this at all. It was completely white, and that's because it had bleached. And this basically happens when the anemone is stressed, and it boots out the symbiotic algae that lives in its tissues called zooxanthellae. But now it seems like conditions have returned to normal, the anemone's not stressed anymore, and now it's gone back to this fantastic green and purple colour.
Anemones also regularly host clownfish or anemone fish, forming a mutually beneficial symbiotic relationship. This reliance means that these clowns, the ones that inspired Nemo, depend heavily on being close to their anemone host, and as such don't really have a choice but to have their pictures taken. Although I also found Dory. Dory is a blue tang, and she was a little more camera shy. However, whilst the soft corals and anemones don't need to be too worried about being consumed by sponges and starfish, they're not immune from being munched.
Oh, I was hoping we'd find one of these. Have a look at this guy.
This is a hawksbill turtle, one of the few marine creatures equipped to bite through the tough exoskeletons of sponges, sea anemones, and even soft corals. With their sharp beak-like mouths, they play a unique role on the reef, helping prevent fast-growing sponges from outcompeting slower-growing corals. But despite their importance, hawksbills have vanished from much of their former range, and are now critically endangered. However, they're big enough and unique enough to keep an eye on, if you can get the right photos.
So, in order to ID this one, I need to get a photo of both sides of its face, so I'm going to try and sneak around the other side.
It's a non-invasive way to monitor where they go, how long they live, and how their populations are changing.
To ID a turtle, you use specialist software to draw a perimeter around the scutes, those distinctive facial scales. Once you've done this, the software then maps out each side of the face, and from there, an algorithm compares it to a database of previously logged individuals to try and find a match. This individual is already known to the team and is called Perlita, and she was last spotted on the same patch of reef almost 3 years ago.
Now, whilst the reef is covered in corallivores, many other groups of fish have little appetite for corals.
Whoa, look at this massive school of surgeonfish. These are algivores, so they love eating algae, and currently they're picking the algae off this big mooring block. But soon they'll probably move on to the coral patch. There they go, look.
Surgeonfishes are named after the razor-sharp scalpel-like spines located just in front of their tails. These can be used to fend off predators, or to settle disputes between each other. Like the butterfly fishes, the restoration of this reef has brought back a huge abundance of surgeonfish species, all with their own behaviours, social structures, and attitudes, but all united by their intense love of algae. They're not alone though. Parrotfishes play a similar role, scraping and even biting off chunks of algae-covered rock with their powerful beaks. In doing so, they help stop algae from smothering the reef, and even create new patches of sand in the process. These two groups, surgeonfishes and parrotfishes, are the reef's gardeners, constantly trimming back the algae so that slower-growing corals get a fighting chance. This fish is a thick-lip wrasse, and whilst it looks remarkably similar to a parrotfish, it's after something entirely different. Instead of algae, it's on the hunt for hidden crustaceans and invertebrates. It does this by scooping up rubble and sand, crushing it with strong pharyngeal jaws, and then spitting out the debris. It's messy work, but on a reef full of hiding places, it's one of the most effective ways to dig out a meal. But it's not the only reef fish that uses its teeth to feed. Tobies, like this ambon toby, are members of the pufferfish family and come equipped with a fused beak that never stops growing. These smaller reef species often use their sharp teeth to graze on sponges, corals, or tiny shelled invertebrates, and they are surprisingly bold for their size. Their larger relatives, like this blue-spotted puffer, take things even further. Armed with bone-crushing jaws that can make short work of anything, from sponges and tunicates to hard-shelled crustaceans and tiny mollusks. Even algae and seagrasses aren't safe. However, whilst the puffers have no interest in squaring up to divers, other fish don't share the same concern.
Oh, please don't go for my face.
This is a Titan triggerfish. Armed with a pair of bone-crunching teeth, they become fiercely aggressive when guarding their eggs. And if you get too close, this happens. However, I don't back down from a fight, and this Titan was definitely not spared from being spied on. Now, Titan triggerfish have conical territories, so by sticking close to the reef, I was able to inch closer and set up a camera.
Easy. Easy.
This might be the first remote camera ever deployed so close to a Titan triggerfish nest, and here is what it recorded. The reddy pink foam-like substance nestled amongst the soft corals is in fact a cluster of eggs. Now, it's very difficult to find information about the intricate brooding behaviour of Titan triggerfish, perhaps because nobody is stupid enough to get so close. What this camera recorded was incredibly interesting. Initially, the Titan stayed away. Perhaps it was put off by the camera, or perhaps it was deliberate. Unprotected, the eggs were soon approached by small reef fish, like goatfish and wrasses, that started picking away. A flag-tailed triggerfish also came in for a closer look, but decided that feeding on Titan trigger eggs was probably a bad idea. However, the big question is, why would a Titan allow smaller fish to feed on its eggs? Perhaps the smaller fish don't trigger an aggression response, as they don't typically pose a threat. A more interesting theory, though, is that given the Titan isn't armed with the right precision tools to pick off dead or diseased eggs, it allows the small reef fish to do so instead. Regardless of the reason, eventually the Titan decided enough was enough, making numerous lunges at various different species that came too close. These triggerfish are so named due to their very pronounced dorsal spine that looks like the trigger from a gun. This one seemed particularly annoyed by a pair of black-lipped butterfly fish that seemed to sink into the fields of fluffy corals, working in tandem to try and sneak closer. However, it takes two Titans to tango, and it seemed this one's partner was keen to check in. In addition to removing dead and diseased eggs, it's also important to keep the eggs ventilated, and despite being known for their aggression, it seems Titans also have a softer side. You can see how this one is gently pulsing its pectoral fins and blowing water from its mouth to wash debris away from the developing youngsters. Thanks to the fantastic work of the team at Project Lout, what was once a rubble wasteland is now a thriving reef once again. The newly established reef is capable of supporting a huge array of fish and other reef critters, and providing a healthy space for them to raise the next generation. However, this reef still holds many secrets, and the spy camera work does not stop here. Subscribe if you want to see what we record next, and let me know in the comments what you'd like me to spy on.